Good afternoon.
And we're live.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the AIB meeting for today's date, which is August the 1st, 2023. We have a pretty full agenda for today. Our main task will be to approve the updated comprehensive plan, and we'll go through that for all 5 pillars with all of the information that's contained therein. I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to look at all of the anticipated changes and amendments there too. And we'll go through that pillar by pillar. And at the end, we'll have one comprehensive vote to approve all of those. And I think in one motion. Let me again thank our staff for getting us to this point today. As I indicated before, it was August the 1st. We had some initial questions whether or not we will be able to meet that given all the other things we do over the last couple of weeks. But again, to Rachel, the entire staff, and everyone involved, thank you. And thanks also to the work that we've had with the state board as well, making sure that we've coordinated appropriately with them as well. At this point in time, we're going to have a roll call. So why don't you start doing that for me, Rachel? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Everyone is present, including Vice Chair Kerwin and members Manco, Doss, Robinson, Lynch, and Stapleton.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Madam Executive. We'll now go to approval of our summary of the last meeting. There's just one, and their motion, therefore, to approve our last meeting summaries.
So moved.
The second.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and properly seconded. We approve the meeting summaries. Are there any discussions, changes, or any questions? I forgot to mention the date. The date would have been July the, what was it, 20? What's the date on that, on those summaries? It's just one. Do we have the date on that, Madam?
It's July 27th, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right. The summaries for the meeting July 27th. Okay, I see no questions or changes there too. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay. Thank you. Motion is approved. Are there any changes to the agenda, questions, how we're going to proceed? So why don't you outline how we're going to proceed for us, Madam Executive, and we'll proceed accordingly unless there are some questions or changes to the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I believe that Executive Director Heiss was having some technical issues and had to leave the meeting. She'll be right back in one moment.
Okay. Well, as I indicated before, we're going to approve all 5 of the pillars of the comprehensive plan overall for today. It reflects a great deal of work that the staff is putting in to make sure that we get to this point. There have been some additional information that I think has been passed back and forth between the staff, working with the state board and others to make sure that we've covered everything. It will be, I think it'll come upon us to continue to make revision because keep in mind that as we determine that there are changes or alterations to be made, we'll make those accordingly. In consideration of that, between now and the time we have the next legislative session in January, there very well could be legislative changes that we have not anticipated thus far, or there may be reaction from us or legislative changes that someone else may have that we'll have to include therein. So this is an important document, but it's a document that to some degree will be subject to changes as we look at new approaches to education and new changes that needs to be made. We are apt to do that. So it did not take this, though this is the last word. We will ever not look at this for an entire year or so. Hopefully we will not have to make many changes, but it's possible that we in fact will have to make changes or alterations there too. It's been a great deal of work and I want to thank everyone for doing so. Is the Madam Executive back at this time?
Mr. Chair, I think that she's still having technical issues, but Emma Pellerin, the Implementation Plan Director, is prepared to begin the overview of the pillars.
anyone else having any other technical difficulties? I probably would not know because I cannot see because if not, let's start because I want to make sure that everybody's included therein. So, okay, let's start with Pillar 1.
Okay, excellent. And I think I'm just checking to make sure that Rachel did not hop back on because my screen just changed. But if Rachel does hop back on, if someone could just interrupt and let me know because I'm not going to be able to see my screen as easily as I usually would. So thank you all. And I will go ahead and share my screen and we're just going to walk through the pillar updates here. But first, I'd like to just give a brief overview of the changes and really what informed the changes for the comprehensive plan updates, particularly since the 27th, but really overall. We really based the updates and revisions similar to the original comprehensive plan that you all approved back in December of 2022, based off of feedback from obviously AIB members, since you had some updates to the plan that you suggested over the last couple of weeks and specifically on the 27th. As well as feedback from MSDE, the State Department of Education. And then we also have some considerations related to the equity of the outcome measures work group recommendations that we have incorporated as much as possible before we get the just final recommendations later on from our equity consultant, Dr. Toldson. But we have tried to incorporate as many of those as we can so far into the recommendations based off of his feedback. In addition, we have incorporated feedback from the public as well as key stakeholders into these updates to the modifications. So I'm just going to keep on going, but if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in at any time. And I'll go ahead and start with just some overall updates to all of the pillars. So as you know, the outcome measures work group has put forward recommendations for revised and updated, or in some cases, just completely new outcome measures and output measures. So in these cases, we do have the previous outcome measures from the comprehensive plan that was adopted again in December 2022. But we are not looking at those or looking to eliminate those from the comprehensive plan. Really, when we, and the work group pointed this out, and this was something that we were aware of going into the work group, that the language around those measures, it actually was in a lot of ways put forward more as goals. So we're updating the language in terms of how we're referring to them, but we're not taking them out of the plan. So across all pillars, across all objectives, we're updating the language there from how we'll measure success, which was what was put at the beginning of each of the pillar sections. We're updating that to pillar goals. And then for each objective, there was a set of outcome measures that we are modifying to just say goals. So we're not looking to take anything out or eliminate that language. We're simply looking at, was this actually a measure? No, really it was put more as a goal in terms of indicating what we hoped would be accomplished or expected to be accomplished once this pillar or this objective was implemented with fidelity and effectively. So we're updating that language for the measures of success, again, changing that to goals. So that's across all pillars. For pillar 1 specifically, we would like to, we're recommending a modification for preparing all children to be ready to learn, to just saying preparing all children to learn at an early age, reduces opportunity gaps, promotes lifelong learning, and improves their chances for success. And this was a statement that we put at the beginning of the pillar 1 section. It's just a summary of the overall intention of that pillar, and we do the same thing across pillars as well. And then I think, is Rachel back on? Right. Okay. Rachel,
you hear me?
Emma,
yes, I can hear
I
you.
just wanted to just share that Rachel is back on, but she's through her phone.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm looking for the chat and it's been a little bit hard to come up. So Rachel, can you hear us and would you like to take over?
I can hear you, but I am sitting in the dark. The power
Okay.
went out.
Oh, no. Okay.
So I will just respond to questions when needed.
Okay,
Sounds good. All right. And again, please feel free to jump in. So that was for the pillar one. Again, the overall statement at the beginning of that section, we're changing that language slightly instead of ready to learn to prepare to learn. And then we have the subtask on local health and social services departments annually notifying families if their 3 or 4-year-old child may be eligible for publicly funded pre-K services. The last time we also noted that we were recommending a legislative change for this subtask to say that requiring local health and social service departments to share the names and contact information of families that may be eligible for publicly funded pre-K services with LEAs, that this is contingent on enactment of a legislative change. So we wanted to clarify that we did say that we were recommending this legislative change. We still have that in the plan, but we're just providing greater clarity that actually enacting this would require a legislative change. So we're just making that slight modification. For implementing a high quality mixed delivery system overall, we're just again adding in some of the work group on English learners recommendations from the subtask in pillar 4, and we're referring back to that one explicitly. We're not taking those out of pillar 4, but just cross-referencing them with the appropriate pillar. So again, we're doing this throughout the entire comprehensive plan. And we felt that adding in this development and adoption of a statewide plan for supporting young English learners in pre-K and early childhood settings was appropriate to include here.
okay. There any question in reference to any of those modifications? Okay, why don't we proceed on then?
Okay, great. You'll see a similar addition again from the work group on English learners recommendations for adopting a standardized comprehensive method for identifying, collecting, and sharing information about young English learners that is required across all LEAs and providers. Again, this was from the work group and we're cross-referencing it here. For 1.1.5a and b, similar to the need for a legislative update with regards to health and social services departments requiring or being required to inform LEAs of eligible 3- and 4-year-olds for pre-K. We are noting that a modification for MSDE not requiring early childhood education certification for pre-K teachers or requiring pre-K teachers to be enrolled in an early childhood education certification program until the 2027 through 28 school year. This also requires a legislative change. So we're keeping our intention to recommend a legislative change again, but we're just clarifying that this is contingent on a legislative change. So making that crystal clear in the guidance.
Let me ask you a question, Emma, because I raised a question about this and I asked to make sure that we had to use this language. And so, Madam Attorney, is it required to use this language? Because I had some problem with the first sentence. We were supposed to go back and double check on that to make sure that this was precisely needed in response to the legislation.
So, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, the question you have is about the language that the implementation is contingent on legislative change?
No, I'm sorry. It says may not require teacher assistance to hold CDA. And I said I didn't like that language because it just seemed so not appropriate to me, saying you're not required to hold a teacher and assistant to hold a CDA. And there was a question raised last time that this language had to be used because of the way the legislation was written, and we had to use this language. And I raised the question, was the best double check to make sure that was correct.
Sure. I think in this entire section, there are some questions about the about how the statutory language is currently written. And so this is an expression of what the AIB would like MSDE to require or not to require. But in order to make that very clear in the law, there will need to be some tweaks to the statute. So I think it's a reflection of what you all desire, and then understanding that there may need to be some changes to the law to make that very clear.
Yeah, I know we want to make the changes. I just had a question whether or not we actually had to say MSDE may not require early childhood education or CDE at the certificate. And I just didn't like the way that sounded, that's all. And some other way we could say it, but I thought that was a question or response that you guys thought that it has to say precisely that, may not require.
I think if that is what the AIB it wants to, that's the expression of your intent for MSDE, that they may not require, then you do need to be very clear about that.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
this language is very clear. It's unambiguous.
All right.
I also have a question. I was under the impression that this happened in the last legislative session, that this came out of legislation. And that's why we were making the change. But it now looks like what's leading us to make this change?
So and I don't have the statute up in front right before me, but there's a section of the law. Oh, sorry, Rachel, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, is that, yes.
I was just gonna talk about
okay.
the 27, 28, beginning in that language. But if you
Yeah.
want to go ahead and talk about that, Rachel, that would be great.
Yeah, let me just explain what the issue is here, so everyone's really clear. So the law previously said that teachers, pre-K teachers, have to have early childhood education certification or be enrolled in an early childhood education certification program beginning in the 25-26 school year. The legislature extended that deadline, that date, by 2 years during this past session to the 27-28 school year. So, Mr. Vice Chair, you are correct that the change in the date is due to a legislative change that was in the past session. The issue is that the statute is silent on what is actually required prior to the 27-28 school year. So that means that MSDE has the discretion under at least one interpretation of the law to require teachers to be certified before that date.
Yeah.
And the intent of this provision is to kind of create an on-ramp so that teachers and teaching assistants have time to meet the requirements. But one issue is that by requiring that high quality certification sooner, it is a potential barrier to more providers expanding pre-K. So that's one issue. The other issue relates to the pre-kindergarten expansion grant program, which is a separate statute and which does require teachers to hold the early childhood certification or be enrolled in a program in order for a provider to be able to receive a pre-K expansion grant. And again, the intent was to create this on-ramp for meeting the high quality staffing requirements. So that is what these two provisions, 1.15A and B, the revisions, would clarify that they're not requirements until the 27-28 school year. And Mr. Chair, I understand that the language has to be specific because it's not that we're not encouraging, and want to assist teachers and teaching assistants in being able to earn these credentials sooner. It's just that to not have it be a requirement and a barrier to expansion of pre-K during the intervening years.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Rachel. That was helpful.
You're very welcome. I can't see anybody or anything, so just let me know when you'd like me to say something.
Okay, we definitely will. Thank you. We also added just moving on, and first I'll see if there's any other questions on what Rachel just explained. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or anything. We have a just slight modification for MSDE's report of its findings regarding the expansion of or students participating in the Teacher Academy of Maryland, whether or not they could earn a CDA by the end of the program. We moved this date to May 1st, 2024 to provide some additional time for MSD to report its findings to the AIB. I think that this date was originally December 1st, 2023, and based on feedback, we wanted to update that. Okay. The next subtask had to do with MSDE contracting with an external entity to periodically evaluate the assessment of the KRA. This came actually, I think, explicitly from Dr. Tolton's report, but also as a reflection of further conversations from the outcome measures work group. We added language on future research and evaluation of the KRA shall also include the validity, reliability, and impact of the KRA on student outcomes and experiences, in addition to what the evaluation calls for in this subtask. For 1.2.1G, again, also related to the KRA and providing professional development to instructional staff to support the assessments administration. We modified the professional development content to include training related to administering the KRA with fidelity and sensitivity to children's diverse backgrounds and needs, as well as effectively interpreting and communicating individual and aggregate KRA results in ways that support children's learning and development. We had previously included the communication of the KRA's results as an implementation consideration, but we wanted to update this explicitly in the implementation guidance and requirements to speak to the communication of those results as well. We also have another request for a legislative change. And this one is regarding the appropriation of $330,000 for each additional PADI center. We're noting that the AIB will request a legislative change to clarify that grants may include 1 year of planning to support the development of new centers. And we have a similar recommendation for Judy centers as well. And Vice Chair Kerwin, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. The language seems a little strange to me. Can the AIB plan direct the governor to do something?
I don't think in this case it's clarifying, I think, that we will request a legislative change for this, but not that we are directing or saying that this will explicitly happen. But Heidi, if you want to.
It's Rachel.
Yeah.
That's language that is in the statute. The statute includes language that the governor must appropriate.
So that's not the AIB language, that's in the blueprint.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Good to clarify. Okay, and again, similar language around each additional Judy center. So these are all the updates related to tasks and subtasks for Pillar 1. We do have a couple of implementation considerations that we're adding and modifying throughout, so we'll get to those a little later. But we can move into Pillar 2 changes. And I'm just going to pause and see if there's any questions related to Pillar 1 changes that we've gone through. Oh, Chair Leggett, I didn't see. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. while we're doing that, looking to do that, can someone call the roll for us, so forth? Because I can't see it. I thought Rachel was going to do that, and she had to step away for a second, so we didn't do that.
Did you want to call, you wanted to call the roll for attendance or just for pillar
I
one?
think
Yeah, attendance.
I think
I
you did that.
did. I think I did do that
Yeah, I think
before
she did,
went.
Mr. Chairman.
I didn't hear it.
Okay.
I can do it very quickly if you like, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Chair Leggett,
Yes, here.
Vice Chair Kerwin.
Here.
I'm just going to do this as people show up on my computer, so it won't be alphabetical. Member Mako.
Here.
Member Lynch. Member Stapleton.
Here.
Member Doss.
Here.
Member Robinson.
Here.
That's 7 members, all accounted for, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, let me proceed on pillar 2.
Okay, thank you. For 2.1.1b, based off of conversations and feedback with MSDE, we updated this language to clarify what we are seeking feedback on, or the findings of MSDE on. So this really is related to the statewide marketing and outreach campaign. So we just updated this language from what MSDE is developing a process to solicit feedback from the LEAs on. So it's really explicitly related to the marketing and outreach campaign that MSDE will be developing and is in the process of developing to expand and diversify Maryland's teacher workforce. But we're keeping, and then we also updated the date of sharing these findings with the AIB from December 1st to May 1st annually. And then we also have, again, another direct recommendation from Dr. Tolson's report on developing and monitoring qualitative and holistic indicators of teacher and leader quality, such as their cultural competence, pedagogical knowledge, and professional growth. I think that this is also included in just our overall implementation considerations, but we wanted to also put this as an explicit charge of the AIB to develop indicators of this. So we have included that in 2.1.5C. For 2.1.5F, we have MSD and LEAs shall implement a standardized exit survey. And this was updated based off of feedback from AIB members during the last meeting. So we modified this update from MSD and LEAs shall implement this standardized exit survey to AIB shall develop and LEAs shall implement a standardized exit survey to identify reasons teachers are leaving an LEA as opposed to the classroom. Yes, Justin, or I'm sorry, Member Robinson and Member Stapleton. I also see your hand, so Member Robinson first.
No problem. I do appreciate that change to the AIB taking the lead on that. I had a question. So in the original wording where it says leaving the classroom, we changed it to leaving an LEA. Are we interested, and it's okay if we're not, but are we interested at all in why people might leave like the teacher track and go into administrator track? Like, are we losing any important information by saying just leaving the LEA? I realize it's probably a capacity issue to talk about the classroom in general, but do you have any thoughts on that, or Rachel, either? Rachel?
Is that you want to
Hi.
change all of the transfers or changes as opposed to just teachers? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I was just curious if we were losing anything by making that change, or was the original intention to be just the LEA?
Yeah, okay. I'm
Can
sorry.
you hear me?
Yeah, Madam Executive
Yes.
Director, you about to say something?
You can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we changed this language partly based on the conversation at the last board meeting. So maybe we misinterpreted it. But the other thing is that typically this kind of an exit interview or exit survey would be done when someone is leaving the employment. So if we wanted to broaden it to leaving the classroom, we would need to have another whole data collection around teachers moving from the classroom to the administrator track. And obviously we'll have that for the career ladder, but we wouldn't necessarily have that data, generally speaking, for other teachers. So that might be a challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Member Stapleton?
Sure, if I'd like to say something about the prior conversation plus my own question. And I believe when we talked about this in the outcomes measures group, we also recognize that there's not going to be quite the same movement between a classroom and going into the administrative track once the career ladder is fully developed, that somebody moving up the ladder will still have classroom responsibilities. So I remember this conversation, like trying to figure out, all right, well, who are we trying to really understand information from? And it was the people who were leaving the district, like they're leaving the school district. Are they leaving to go to a different state because those conditions are better? Are they leaving because they're a parent and they just had a baby, or are they leaving because the teaching profession is just not for them? I mean, just finding out more information about that. My own question concerns 2.1.5C. I'm a little worried that this addition, so I read the original objective to be at a statewide level, will monitor the quality, probably in terms of sort of preparation, where are they being trained, what sort of certifications do teachers have, the racial diversity and the geographic distribution of the teaching workforce. Go back, there we go, wait. Okay, thank you. The new addition suggests that we'll be monitoring much more. We're creating an assessment for cultural competency, pedagogical knowledge, and professional growth. So this and it implies that we're doing it for every teacher out there. I think this is a large resource request to do this sort of thing, unless we define it more narrowly in terms of some sort of sample. But I'm a little worried about that change. And I'd love to hear others' opinions about that.
I agree with you on that. And I would alter the word from shall to recommend. That would give us some flexibility, I think, to not do this precisely as indicated, and give us a little bit of flexibility after we've had a chance to fully develop this. So my view would be recommend developing as opposed to shall develop. Would that satisfy you for that purpose?
Yeah, I think it suggests that we will look further into whether this is doable.
Give us more time on that, and therefore we haven't lost the thought. We just need more time because I share your assessment. This may be a pretty heavy lift, and we need some flexibility to modify this as we go forward. And so by saying recommend, then that gives us some flexibility, I would think. Robert, as our attorney, will that language help us in that regard?
Certainly, it's substituting the word may is less, is not mandatory.
Yeah. Okay. May or shall.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Right.
How about shall consider?
Okay.
Qualitative and holistic or something. I don't think we can recommend because we'd be recommending to ourselves, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
And I apologize, I can't raise my hand. What about if it just says AIB may develop and monitor qualitative and holistic indicators?
I think all of those changes suggest it gives us the flexibility. So let's go with may instead of shall.
Okay.
All right.
I see that Member Lynch and Member Manco have their hands up.
I was just going to ask for a little bit of clarity as to what are we trying to actually measure with this? Because I'm just wondering, when I look at what the relevant objective and task is, it seems to be a little bit more global, and this seems to be very much like an individual teacher competency based. And so I was just looking for a little bit of clarity as to the information we're hoping to glean and the purpose for that information.
I think that this came from, Rachel, go ahead.
Thanks, Emma. I didn't hear what was said earlier, so this may have already been said, but some of these provisions are from Dr. Toldson's draft report and recommendations. And so we just tried to identify some of those items that might make sense to incorporate now, with the idea that the outcome measures work group would review these measures for whether they could be, operationalized, because they're, with many of the measures that are being proposed, there's a lot of additional work that needs to be done on sort of how to measure it and if it can be measured, and then of course the cost involved, to Member Stapleton's point. So the intent was that this would then be, as a measure, the actual indicators would need to be actually, developed by the outcome measures work group potentially. And in terms of what it's measuring, I guess that's a good way to put it, individual competency, but is broadening the definition of quality, I think is what Dr. Toldson's intent is, to incorporate other elements of what we want teachers to be able to do and know.
Well, I guess with the language that we just added, Madam Lynch, that the what can be part of the consideration, as well as how we're doing that. Once we go back to look at it later on, determine whether or not we want to go forward with this as written. So it not only include the other components therein, the magnitude of it, but the question of what we're measuring, so that we can answer your question. But by substituting the word may, it allows us that flexibility to consider that before going forward.
I think that distinction is important. I may also offer, I guess, the question of, do we have to add it now, or is that something that we can phase in the our metrics, so that we could begin by looking at sort of that demographic distribution of racial diversity, geographic distribution, the quality in terms of which I'm assuming is probably whether somebody's nationally board certified. But if we couldn't start there, and then as we have our first round of information, we'll have a better understanding of kind of what we need to be looking at moving forward. I think May gets us there. I will offer that I think we have a teacher shortage issue, and we also have, a resource shortage issue. And so I think this will be a lot of work on both individual school systems to then create and track these systems. I think it will require a lot. I think we absolutely want to be looking at improving our teacher quality. When I read this, I'm a little bit concerned just about the level of the lift that is required at the same time we're doing multiple other things.
Yeah, but you don't think May helps us to do that, though?
It does, as long as we, I guess my point is whether or not we want to hold on it at all. Because my question would be, will LEAs interpret this as we need to start thinking about how we would be collecting this information proactively, because we have some LEAs that are
okay.
Who want to make sure that they're ahead of the curve, and so maybe be sending them off to this, and maybe not. Those are just my questions.
That's a good point, because we've encouraged our LEAs to think proactively and to get ahead of the curve and do things when they know things are coming, and we may be encouraging them to in fact start doing work that we may not even require because of the magnitude of it. So given that insight that you just provided, I would say let's exclude it until we come back and relap with other information before we decide to go on, because we don't want to have them, given all the work that they're already doing, to do things proactively that we may not require them to do. So my suggestion would be that we hold it and then come back after we had a chance to more fully discuss it.
I think,
Clear what's being said?
sorry, go ahead.
I was trying to find, is everyone's clear what we're suggesting, that because some may in fact proactively start work on things which we have not formally decided that we want to do, and it could be a whole array of additional work. Let's hold up on this until we've completed the loop and firmly decided precisely what and how we're going to collect information, if at all.
Mr. Chair, I am back. So I'm able to see, and I do see Member Doss and Member Robinson both have their hands raised.
I think Member Minko also had his hand raised before too earlier, but he may no longer have a question, but just wanted to.
His hand is not raised now.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Related to this question now that we're discussing. Hand raised for this question. If not, we'll get the other questions after we've decided this.
So, Mr. Chair, I agree with what you were just proposing. My hand was raised for a different item, so I'll let Dr. Doss speak first if she's speaking on this topic.
Dr. Doss?
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute. I guess my comment is mute right now, since we're going to kind of not do this or not consider it until later. All I was going to say is that I do concur with the may. I think that cuts it. And I don't think really that I think the may really covers it when you initially said may. And because we don't have anything that's clearly defined right now, I don't think folks will run off and try to measure cultural competence or pedagogical knowledge, because there's nothing defined. There's no way to do that. It may be considering it, or they may think about it, which is a good thing to have them think about these, but I don't think they'll try to run off and measure, because there's nothing really defined to measure.
Okay.
So.
Any other questions or comments on this section?
I actually agree with what Member Doss just said. I can't imagine LEAs going off and starting on this with all the other work they've got to do if the word may is there, but I'm okay either way.
All right. Any other comments on it? Okay, I don't need to take a vote on it. I heard two people who had okay with may, a couple of, I think 3 had said okay with just taking it out altogether. Any other two want to comment on it? We had Member Manko and Member Stapleton. Let me hear your views on it, one way or the other, may or just take it out for the time being.
I would agree with Member Doss and Vice Chair Kerwin that we should keep it in with the application of May.
All right. Well, it's your call, Madam.
Well, actually, I don't know if Member Robinson spoke
He did.
on the topic, but I mean, I would, I guess, defer to people who have experience with teacher unions and how this element as part of the plan might play out. And so that's not me, but.
All right. Well, it's back to you. Make sure your position again, Member Robinson.
Ooh. Honestly, I could see it going either way. I guess what I would go with the may. I would go with the may.
All right. So it's May. Keep the May in. That's it.
I like
all right.
that telegraphs our intention.
That's all. That's fine. We could go with May. Let's go on then. May is in.
Okay.
Okay. I think Member Robinson had a different question.
Yeah, I guess kind of related back to what I was asking before. I was thinking about what Member Stapleton had said. And I think given the latest legislative changes, it kind of changes whether people will actually be on the administrative track and teaching. And so I guess my wondering is, I think it would be too much to kind of do all of that, but I think a sampling survey or something along those lines might be beneficial for, I guess, increasing improving the viability of teaching in the classroom as a career. And I think it would be good to know why people are choosing not to do that. So I don't know. I don't think it should be like every single person. That might be a heavy lift, but I think it might be worth it for us to, I guess, do some kind of sampling to figure out what people might be saying, and as reasons for why they're making the switch to the different track.
So you're suggesting, I just want to be, if we kept it to the career ladder, would that satisfy what you're looking for? Are you looking for all teachers?
I like what's there right now. What I was saying was, I think in addition, I understand
the administrator track.
Yeah, because what Member Stapleton was saying about removing the classroom part, that did make sense in the case when administrators, especially assistant principals, were still like in the classroom, like teaching in the classroom. But I think that because of the legislative change, it's not necessarily going to look the same. And so it might give valuable data to understand like why people are making the change between the tracks and indeed actually leaving the classroom. Even, so it's a different dynamic now that wasn't in play at the time of writing,
But you suggest that we do a sampling of that, not a heavy lift of every position, and that's what you suggest?
That's my suggestion. I think it might be a lot to do everyone, but I do think it's worth. I think it's important information.
Okay. Well, maybe we can develop the language around that we can consider the matrix that will get us sampling periodically. It doesn't have to be done every year, but done periodically. We can develop something around that, Rachel, and maybe that would get us to the point we need to. And it may have some good value too, because we now will have, you remember before, one of the things of the career ladder and increased pay is that we wanted to keep teachers in the classroom as much as possible. And so having information as to why they would still leave, even though we have a career ladder and high amounts of monies, that may be good information for us to have. And so let's try to develop around that by simply saying we may look at surveys to try to get a better assessment of that.
Thank you.
Member Stapleton's hand is up. I wasn't sure if it was on this point.
Yeah, it was on this point. And we've been talking so far about teachers moving from the classroom into administrative roles. And I think we've had in our heads, like in the same school but they also could go to the district central office, right? Mm-hmm. So I do like the idea, Member Robinson, of maybe we can include a statement at the end of this saying, and may develop a sample survey of teachers who choose to move to administrative or central roles.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Any other question on that, Member Robinson? Will that satisfy it?
No, that's perfect. Thank you for that addition, Member Stapleton.
Thank you. Let's go on, Emma or Rachel, either one.
Go ahead, Emma.
Okay. The next one has to do with, again, an update based off of AIB feedback. We previously included an update around the supports for NBC candidates or national board candidates, and included that local national board coordinators and facilitators shall organize affinity groups for NBC candidates. And we updated this to specify that this would include affinity groups for historic populations of teachers historically underrepresented in the profession, as opposed to what was previously there, which was educators of color, and wanted to make that more specific and clarify the intent here, which was for multiple affinity groups and not just a single affinity group. And really for affinity groups, just as needed, basically. And again, that was based off of AIB feedback. Are there any questions about this update?
All right.
Okay. All right. As we indicated earlier, we also have, again, more recommendations from Pillar 4 with the work group on English learners recommendations, another cross-reference here to the system of professional development, providing training for all current educators on the assets of multilingualism, and improving academic outcomes for multilingual learners. and we're referencing that back to Pillar 4. And then we've also provided some more specific language here around the development of a professional development system tied to the career ladder. And we just added in language to say that this will ensure that experienced educators in higher rungs of the career ladder have received training to effectively support their colleagues.
Okay.
So this brings us to Pillar 3. Executive Director Heiss, would you like to take over?
Yes, and as long as my power holds.
Okay.
Yes. In Pillar 3, 3.1.3b, we talked about this at last week's meeting as well, relates to the comprehensive plans for English language arts and math, aligned with the blueprint, including the science of instruction. The language that we are proposing to modify is based on some feedback that we received that raised a concern that we were only referencing the science of instruction as an evidence-based practice and not other evidence-based best practices or components of a literacy plan or a math plan. And so the new language is intended to clarify that it includes evidence-based best practices such as the science of instruction, but not only the science of instruction.
Okay.
I believe that Vice Chair Kerwin has some concerns about that change. Dr. Kerwin, you're on mute.
I want to say up front that, you know, I'm not an expert in the various of the science of instruction or reading. So, but here, let me express my concern. There's lots of research out there on all sorts of educational practices. And I think it's not hard for someone to compile some examples and claim that they're evidence-based. And so my concern is this. I think what we've learned is that the science of reading, literacy instruction that relies upon at various stages the use of phonics has proven to be the most effective literacy educational method. Certainly the work done in Mississippi was very much when they made based on the fact that they changed and went to using what I'll refer to as a science of reading, which had the use of which employed the use of phonics. So my concern here is that if we say such as the science of instruction, which I think includes the science of reading, such as means that not exclusively, and therefore someone could use strategies that are devoid of phonics. They could go to whole language or whatever some of the other reading strategies are that aren't as effective. And so I also know that from talking to people within the University System of Maryland, that many of our campuses in their teacher preparation programs give lip service to using the science of reading and phonics based strategies for teaching literacy, but don't really adhere to them. And I just think that if we say such as, we are opening too big a door for us in the development of the literacy strategies that won't in fact employ what I think has been proven to be the most effective literacy teaching strategy. Now, there are probably people on this call that know more about this and can correct my thinking, but that's my concern.
Thank you. Any reactions or questions or comments?
Member Lynch has her hand raised.
Yeah, I actually, I agree with Vice Chair Kerwin. I think evidence-based and science-based a lot of times are used interchangeably, but you can create your own sort of, evidence-based, I think, leaves a little bit more to interpretation. I've expressed my concern that what often happens is curriculums are packaged with the title. So when it says the science of reading, a curriculum is packaged as the science of reading. And then we ask LEAs, are you doing the science of reading? And they confuse the actual body of literature and the body of work with a prepackaged curriculum. And so I, in my advocacy, wanted to be careful that the AIB didn't appear as if we were advocating for any sort of packaged curriculum, but instead we're really leaning into the actual science of beyond reading, of instruction, of science, of the content that we are actually really leaning into the science of best practice and of pedagogy that are related. So I think when we say such as, we leave it up to interpretation. And I do think that as the AIB, we should be a little bit more prescribed in saying that any sort of practices should really be focused in scientific research on the brain, learning, pedagogy, child development. I think that's important.
Okay. Any other comments out there, Rachel? I mean, Madam Executive Director?
Member Robinson?
I do agree with the previous two comments. I just kind of wondered what the best way to kind of, I don't know, update or amend this to be. Are you interested in more of specifically saying what we're considering to be evidence-based or science best practices, or like I don't know the best way to move forward from the language. I do agree with the sentiment. I guess I'm curious how you would tweak it. I guess.
Yeah, I agree with your sentiment too, but I want to be very clear about this section. So let's not rush through this. If there's specific, if there's specific language, a change that we need to make, we need to be very clear about this because this is very important here, I think. And you make some very wonderful comments about it, but I want to move beyond that to say, okay, all right, we have some comments that identified the problem. What would be the appropriate language or terms that we use to get precisely at what the three speakers thus far have identified?
So could I make and again, this is not as an expert, but would it make sense to say practices that are aligned with the science of instruction?
Okay, how would that read here then? Let's
including evidence-based practices aligned with the science of instruction.
Okay.
Rachel, is that an issue? Is that a problem?
It's not a problem. Obviously, we can change the language, and I totally understand where you all are coming from. I just want to be the feedback that we received was that the language says adopt and implement comprehensive pre-K-12 instructional plans for ELA and math aligned with the blueprint, including the science of instruction, is what it used to say, including the science of instruction. And the feedback that we received was that science of instruction is important, but it's not the only thing that should be in a comprehensive literacy plan or a comprehensive math plan. So that was the reason for the change in the language. And so if we say aligned with, yeah, I'm not sure that that fully covers the point that we want to make sure that other evidence-based, or we could change that to back to research-based if you don't like evidence-based practices that related to, you know, multi-tier systems of support, for example, professional development training on high-quality instructional materials. So aligned with certainly works in terms of aligning to the science of instruction, but it doesn't get at that feedback that we received. And I do see Mr. Manco's hand has been raised, and Member Lynch also has her hand raised.
So I mean, I just want to say in general, I've been thinking a lot about this and struggling with it quite a bit, just in terms of trying to figure out like what's within our purview and what's outside of our purview, and also understanding that this is a core component of MSDE strategic plan, and trying to kind of balance what our role is in supporting this across the state, but also just being mindful of just trying to determine where our jurisdiction kind of runs headfirst into things that are under their purview. But I think maybe up for a larger conversation at some point. I think for the specific question, I wonder if modifying this to say including evidence-based best practices and the science of instruction covers both. That the science of instruction, it's an expectation that the science of instruction is included, but that also evidence-based best practices are things that should also be examined and considered.
Okay, good point. Any other reaction to Member Manco's question or what has been raised thus far from board members?
Yeah, I think I have just a question and then a thought. I guess one of my questions is, I think throughout history, evidence-based has always been part of the language of instruction. And so it's something that we've always used. And I think that what we have found is that, sometimes what we have been taking and running are very small sample sizes with, perhaps not peer-reviewed research. So I think what I'm hearing Vice Chair Kerwin say is that we need to have some sort of standard by which we considered what is evidence-based. And I think so. I do sort of want we should be doing things that are evidence-based, but I think we need to be raising the standard on what we actually consider to be evidence-based. And then the other point that I would like to ask for consideration is that we talk about the science of instruction, which is really teacher-led. And I'm wondering if we could also consider the science of learning, which is about how students are absorbing that information.
Hands up in addition to Member Lynch?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Well, we need to, I think, augment the language to reflect the concerns that have been raised here. And I think there are legitimate concerns. But Member Curran has raised the question of whether or not you need to be more precise and indicating some of the things that are included within the science. And if so, what would they be?
Member Stapleton actually has raised her hand.
Sorry, I threw my hand up. I thought that Vice Chair Kerwin was going to talk for a little bit, but then he took his hand down. I just wanted to echo or say +1 to Member Lynch's comments. I do think that this is more. I would love for us to move away from labels like as science of instruction, science of reading, science of learning, but just indicate that scientific evidence-based practices and understanding that there's a whole science behind learning. And the practices should reflect knowledge of that science. How you get that into a small phrase, I don't know.
Here, here.
So, I've heard a couple of suggestions. One is replacing such as with, aligned with, or, we could say aligned with, and Mr. Manko suggested, and so we could say aligned with the blueprint, including evidence-based best practices that are aligned with the science of reading, of instruction. That would be one suggestion.
Say that again.
Let's see. So right now it says aligned with the blueprint, comma, including evidence-based best practices.
Rachel, may I make a suggestion on your line?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Say a lot, the mathematics, the English language and mathematics, including evidence-based practices aligned with the blueprint and the science of instruction. In other words, move aligned with the blueprint after the underlined phrase.
Can someone put that up on the screen? Let's look at that, because I'm getting a little confused here.
Emma is on it.
Okay. Vice Chair Curran, does this language that's has been put up?
I would be happy with this language.
Okay, let's read this out, Rachel, make sure everybody sees it.
I think Member Lynch
Okay,
also has a suggestion. I'm not sure if you're able, you put something in the chat, which I can read.
That was just as we were doing the other one as well. So I mean, I'm happy with this. I do, I am going to sort of lean in to request that we also include the science of learning, because I think it gets the brain-based research that is important as part of this conversation.
okay, let's see if we can work all of this in. All right.
So Emma, can we just say including evidence-based best practices aligned with the blueprint, comma, the science of instruction, comma, and the science of learning?
Yeah. All right. Did that capture all of it now, to be sure? Let's look at it carefully.
The only other suggestion I made, and we don't have to go with it, is just to say peer-reviewed evidence-based practices. So it does sort of allow an extra level of review.
I assume that was already included when you said best practices. That's what I assume. But if you want to say that and add anything different to it, that's fine. Right now, including evidence-based best practices aligned with the blueprint, the science of instructions, and the science of
I think I'm comfortable with that. I think peer reviewed is not necessary.
I think that's included.
Yeah.
You say practice. That's the best practice. So, all right. Any question about this language?
Mhm. No, I'm comfortable with this one.
Dr. Curran, does that reflect your?
This is, I'm very happy with this, and I want to thank my colleagues for their help in making this modification.
Okay, let's accept that unless there are objections. Let's move on.
Great. The next provision is something that when we were discussing some of this language with MSDE, we realized that we were going to need to probably provide guidance on the components that contribute to a comprehensive plan. So we added language here that MSD and AIB will provide the LEAs with guidance on the components
Yes, I just
contribute to a cohesive and
called and
successful
I couldn't take your.
comprehensive plan. And then we also modified language that we had discussed at the last meeting around MSD and AIB reviewing LEA plans for alignment with the blueprint to sort of mimic the evidence-based best practices language from above. So we would just take the new language and use it here.
Okay.
Emma, maybe you can just make that change now. And then, so that has to do with that provision. Sorry. The last item on that slide relates to the college and career ready pathways. And at the last meeting, we discussed the modification around providing the option for LEAs to develop a sequence of AP classes for students to complete as part of the post-CCR pathway. In discussing this with MSDE further, we wanted to put a little bit of guide rails around that. And so the suggestion is to include a comprehensive interdisciplinary sequence of AP classes for students to complete, and that AIB and MSDE would provide guidance on what constitutes a comprehensive and interdisciplinary sequence of AP courses, and that those new sequences would not be implemented. So basically they would use this school year to develop those, and then they could begin implementing their own sequence in the next school year. Member Doss?
Thank you, Executive Director. Just a comment, if we go up one before, and this is a very small comment, where we have modified AIB and MSDE shall monitor the implementation, so on and so forth. In most cases throughout, we've been saying MSDE and AIB. So maybe we should switch that around unless there's a reason.
There's no reason for either order, so we can certainly switch that.
Okay, thank you.
Other than it's good practice to refer to your partner first.
Okay.
Okay, so if there aren't any questions on that, I think the next slide, we can go to the next slide, Emma. Okay, this relates to the CTE committee is required to establish goals that from this year through 2030-31 that would allow the state to reach the 45% goal that is in the statute regarding high school students who complete the high school level of a registered apprenticeship or another industry recognized occupational credential before they graduate. We talked about this at the last meeting, and the discussion was to modify the date to provide the CTE committee with more time to complete this work. And we did consult with them, and they were very happy to have more time. And also that by going with the June 1st date, this would also put the due date after the legislature has an opportunity to consider whether they actually want to extend the date in the upcoming session. So that reflects that discussion that we had at the last meeting. And then we also added a provision that has been come up a few times related to the sharing of data. So this provision just asks the MLDSC MSD and any other state agencies that have relevant data on CTE progress to share it with the CTE committee.
Okay.
Is that it for pillar 3? Okay.
Any question on pillar 3? All right, let's move on.
Emma, do you want to take pillar 4?
Sure. So we made a couple of updates regarding the training for culturally competent training designed by MSDE. Previously, we updated this from the work group on English learners, developing this culturally competent training that EL family coordinators will deliver to school personnel. So we previously updated this from the work group designing this training to MSDE. After talking with them and getting their feedback, we also updated the dates by which the training shall be designed from December 1st, 2023 to June 1st, 2024, just to provide sufficient time for a comprehensive and impactful training program to be designed. And then also that would allow for the training to be implemented in the 2024 to 25 academic year. So we've updated those provisions in 4.2.1D. For 4.3.2A, this is on the special education work group. And the work group, we have modified a couple of updates here, again, based off of feedback from conversations with MSDE staff. So we originally had that the work group, that AIB shall approve, review and approve the work plan, and have updated this language to say that the work group shall share its work plan with the AIB and provide regular updates on its progress moving forward, as opposed to reviewing and approving the work plan. Does anybody have any questions about pillar 4? These are actually the only updates that we have for pillar 4. Okay. Rachel?
All right.
Okay. For pillar 5, the first item refers to the expected outcome. And these are provisions that we worked on last year as we were developing the comprehensive plan, the initial comprehensive plan. The expected outcome for pillar 5 was really a repeat of the overall blueprint goal, because at the time we were sort of thinking of pillar 5 as sort of all of the pillars are feeding into pillar 5, which is supporting successful implementation of the blueprint. But as we've been doing work with the outcome measures work group and also with the logic models or the theory of action, we realized that, you know, pillar 5 really does need its own expected outcome that is more around building a sustainable accountability structure or continuous improvement structure for the state, that would allow for the ongoing planning, monitoring, and support of blueprint implementation across the entire sort of education system, including pre-kindergarten through into post-secondary education and the workforce preparation system. So we are proposing essentially a different expected outcome for pillar 5.
Okay.
Okay, next item. We just have some.
Rachel, apologies, I was on mute. Could we go back to that for a second?
Sure.
The previous one. So the replacement. So does the replacement replace all of pillar 5 expected outcome language?
It does, but that expected outcome for pillar 5 is also already included in the comprehensive plan as the expected outcome of the entire blueprint.
In other words, the language that is being replaced appears elsewhere.
Yes.
Blueprint.
Yes.
Okay.
It is the expected outcome of the entire blueprint.
I thought maybe we were lowering our expectations substantially with this new language, but if you're telling me that the language that is on the left-hand side appears elsewhere or is part of the blueprint, then I'm fine.
It is, it
Okay,
does.
thank you.
Yes. I'm glad you asked that for clarity. So on this next slide, we really just went through and updated and provided language to update the various provisions that relate to AIB, the submission of implementation plans and technical assistance dates for 2024. And so you can see in the first item, we added that the AIB will annually update the minimum guidelines for implementation plans. We had established a certain set of minimum guidelines or requirements last year in the comprehensive plan, and we will need to update those before the plans are submitted in the next round. Member Kerwin?
Yes. I don't know whether, and I don't know that I can suggest any alternative off the top of my head, although I've thought about it a little bit. I may be a minority of one here, but minimum guidelines bothers me. It sounds, I know what we're trying to say, but it sounds like a pretty low bar. And
Why don't we take the word minimum out of there?
Yeah, I'm just looking at what we said in the plan, and they are called, in the statute, they're called minimum guidelines. And as you may recall, they were tied to the release of the fiscal 23 blueprint funds.
right.
When you all approved that they had all met the minimum guidelines. But in section 5, they're called guidelines for submitting state and local implementation plans. So I think we could just call them that and take the word minimum out.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
The next item, it just has to do with for technical assistance, we added, in addition to that AIB would provide technical assistance as needed, we also added or requested, so that we wanted to be clear that, you know, if an agency asks for a certain type of technical assistance, that we would provide that.
Okay.
The next item, 5.1.2C, on the left-hand side, we did update the date so that, and we talked about this at the last meeting, so that the state agency plans will be submitted by June 15th of 2024, rather than in March as they were this year. And then we just, on the right-hand side, modified so that the plans will have to be consistent with any updates that are made to the comprehensive plan. So this is really just kind of housekeeping on the language. In 5.1.2D, this relates to under the previous language, the AIB was to approve or disapprove plans by July. And that was related to the initial plans, and this was prior to the adoption of the appeal process that set up a timeline. So we just modified this to reflect the December 1st deadline that you all have set in the appeals process. And we do have a link to that in a later section. That plans will, the AIB will either approve or disapprove every LEA plan by December 1 each year.
Okay.
The next item is related to, we've already talked about the first item. And then 5.1.3D, the last item on this slide, this is something that was brought up at the last board meeting. So we've added language, I believe by member Stapleton, that AIB and MSDE will jointly develop a framework to identify necessary areas of technical assistance for LEAs and the entity who was responsible for providing the technical assistance, and that the framework will be updated annually.
Okay.
And Emma, just related to member Doss's comment earlier, we might just flip those, the order of those, and I see another one on the next slide.
Where are we here?
Okay. 5.1.3E, this, again, this is just very similar to, so basically in the plan, there's provisions related to the state agency plans and provisions related to the LEA plans. So the first and second items, I described the change that we were making for the state plans. We're making the same change for the LEA plans, except for the LEA plans, we're sticking with the March 15th deadline for plans to be submitted in 2024. And then the same language around the framework for technical assistance. And then below that is just updated, the years are being updated for when AIB will post guidance regarding the breakdown of the foundation formula. And then 5.2.3, we start to get into the provisions related to expert review teams. And at the last meeting, the request was made to change the word approximately. So we've substituted at least 10% of schools each year will be visited by expert review teams. And then at the last meeting, we had suggested some new language around the timeline for when reports would be submitted by MSDE and expert review teams to the AIB. We had some more discussion with MSDE, and instead of 45 days, which is roughly 6 weeks, they asked for one more week, so 7 weeks. And so what the schedule would be is that the expert review teams who are writing the reports, those reports would be sent to the schools for a review and comment period within 4 weeks of the school visit. The school would have 2 weeks to provide its comments, return its comments to the ERT and MSDE, and then the MSDE and the ERT would have 1 week to finalize the report and submit it to AIB. So that is where the 7-week time frame comes from. And then we also, above that, because of the timeline there, we in discussing with the MSDE, felt that there really was not a separate post-visit summary. That's not something that is currently planned to be done. And so we did not want to add to the timeline or the workload in order to be able to get the final expert review team reports out to the schools and to AIB. So we have removed that language, and in place we've just added that MSDE will share school visit data with AIB, which they have already agreed to do. And then the last item on this slide is the that appeal process that I described earlier. Member Lynch.
I just could you just go through that timeline one more time? The school system has 4 weeks to respond to the expert review team's report.
No, they have 2 weeks. So the expert review team has 4 weeks to take all of the observations and data and recommendations that they've developed during their visit and turn it into a report and recommendations. So they have 4 weeks to do that. Then it goes to the school and they have 2 weeks to review the draft report and recommendations and give any feedback. And then MSDE has 1 more week then to finalize the report and submit it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands. I think that was the last item for pillar 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments that members would like to make about the overall changes that are being made for the blueprint for this year?
We do have just a few more slides, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So we also have some additions to implementation considerations that we just wanted to go over quickly. I won't read through all of these, but some of these do come again directly from the report that Executive Director Heiss described earlier. And we saw those reflected as well in some of the implementation guidance and requirements that we've added for Pillar 1. So these are, again, some updates to the implementation considerations in each pillar. Does anyone have any questions for Pillar 1? Okay, I see no hands. So we also have some additions for Pillars 2, 3, and 5 as well. We are slightly modifying one of the existing implementation considerations for Pillar 3, just to say that we're adding in criteria for exiting intervention services aligned with evidence-based MTSS multi-tiered systems of support, just to make sure that that's clear what that exit criteria should be aligned with and include. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. We also have some additional output and outcome measures and data to track that have been raised, again, through public feedback, through stakeholder feedback, through the report from Dr. Tolson, as well as just additions that have been raised since we discussed the outcome measures report back on the 20th. So I'll go through some of these now. For Pillar 2, we are recommending an additional output and outcome measure. Well, actually, one of these is revised, and this is partly based off of recommendations from the AIB. But for the additional output measure, we have number of hours on average that teachers participate in professional development, disaggregated by the LEA, school, and teacher demographics and type of training, such as cultural competency, culturally responsive teaching, individualized instruction, and pedagogical knowledge. And I think that this came directly from Dr. Tolson's report, right, Rachel?
Yeah, yes, from his draft report, but yes.
Yes, his draft report, yes, yes.
Is that annually? Is that measure annually?
Pretty much all of them are annual, although they don't say annual. This is one where I think, again, the outcome measures work group and the ex officio group will need to look at, what's involved in trying to collect this data.
I just want to make sure that we clarify that one way or the other once they have a chance to further look at that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This next outcome measure is just a revision based off of comments and feedback from the AIB in our last meeting. So it was originally around the retention of teachers overall, and we just specified this based off of the updates that the career ladder is making to teaching time, but really retention of teachers who are still teaching in the classroom a portion of their time in Maryland pre-K through 12 schools for 5 or more years. So I think that we captured the feedback from that meeting. And then we have a few other areas of data to track for Pillar 2, again, based off of recommendations. So we have percentage of teacher candidates from HBCUs and MSIs. That's historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions. And then percentage of Maryland teachers who graduated from approved state teacher preparation programs and percentage of Maryland teachers who graduate from out-of-state teacher preparation programs. This was based off of feedback, I think, from the July 20th meeting, again, from the AIB. And then we also have feedback from institutions of higher education, disaggregated, as well as school districts and teacher candidates on their experiences and needs related to teacher preparation and recruitment. So Member Stapleton, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure all the members understand the difference between output outcome measures and data to track. So I think all of these bullets that you just went through, the percentage of teachers, that is on the tracking
Yes.
group. We're just going to pay attention to them, but we're not necessarily going to, we're not going to set targets on them.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make sure everybody was reminded of that.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And that is explicitly why, yes, I didn't put output or outcome measure beside them. But thank you for raising that and clarifying that. We also have a few additions for output measures and outcome measures revised for Pillar 3. We thought that it would be helpful to identify a few more output measures related to CTE specifically. So we are recommending output measures related to the number of pathways approved by the CTE committee and apprenticeships approved by the CTE committee, as well as occupational skill standards adopted or revised by the CTE committee, all of which are within the CTE committee's scope of work and outlined in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan in Pillar 3. In addition, we revised an existing outcome measure recommendation related to the percentage of students earning an industry recognized credential approved by the CTE committee. I think this previously said it was who complete a high school level apprenticeship, and we will still be tracking that and measuring that. But in this case, we are disaggregating between industry recognized credentials that are achieved through a high school level apprenticeship versus industry recognized credentials that are achieved not through a participating and completing a high school level apprenticeship. And then this again would be disaggregated by the standard student groups that we've previously identified. In addition, we'd like to track for data to track access to a well-rounded curriculum across schools and LEAs. And as mandated by COMAR, this is based off of feedback that we've gotten from a variety of stakeholders and members of the public related to access to other subject areas beyond ELA and math. So we're thinking social studies, the arts, gifted and talented programs. So we wanted to make sure that that was elevated as something that we will indeed be tracking. Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. We also have a few additions for outcome measures related to the implementation of community schools. So first, this is I'll just take a minute to explain this one. Really, when we look at indicators of and measures of community schools, just based off of research, and we've looked at some recommendations and what could possibly be measures of strong community school implementation, we saw that quite a few areas had measures or recommended measures that we already included in our outcome measures, such as looking at post-CCR pathway completion. That's actually kind of called out in our outcome measures and was a recommendation that we saw in some research related to community schools for measuring community school implementation, like number of AP courses completed, CTE courses or industry credentials achieved, other measures of student achievement and success. So we didn't want to just duplicate those measures again, but just call out that we will be disaggregating those measures by community schools in addition to all of the other by students enrolled in and teachers working in community schools. So those are some explicit outcome measures, not all of them. It would make sense to disaggregate by students enrolled in or teachers working in community schools, but we will do that wherever it is possible and appropriate to ensure that we're including those measures as well. We also would recommend a few other measures related to community schools, or at least tracking this data, such as the number of families and neighbors who volunteer at community schools, family reports of feeling confident in supporting their children's learning in community schools, their reports of feeling welcomed and valued and connected to the community school, as well as the diversity of voices and groups that are documented in the needs assessment conducted by the community school coordinator, which is something that is a standard practice for community schools and built into the blueprint. So these measures are, these data to track actually really speak to overall recommendations for, or wraparound services, I should say, that community schools naturally are naturally embedded within the community school model. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. And I think that it goes without saying that there's going to be some large discussions with the outcome measures work group about how to operationalize these measures. And we're looking forward to those discussions. And we always have a lot more work to look forward to. So we're excited to dig into that moving forward. Okay, we just have one more slide here. So we're almost done. Rachel, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So we just wanted to cover the other updates that we will be making to the comprehensive plan, and that is to sort of streamline the first two sections of the plan. And then we're going to incorporate the outcome measures work group report and recommendations as revised and approved by the AIB in the comprehensive plan as section 2. And in that language, we would also be clarifying that whenever possible, we're going to disaggregate the data in many ways that we've listed on slides in the past, and that language will be in the report, as well as intersections of student and teacher identities. And as Emma said, the work group will be continuing its work and specifically focusing on operationalizing or defining the outcome and output measures, what those metrics look like, and the availability of data and the other potential issues that need to be addressed as we work to finalize the metrics and then begin the target setting work.
Okay.
So with that, if there are any other questions, or else we would ask for a motion.
Let me make sure that we're clear on what we're doing here. We're going to have a motion that comprehensively adopts all of the recommendations for the blueprint and outcome measures that have been stated here today. Executive Director Heiss or attorneys Deuterer, do you have the motion before us to read so that we would take action on that, assuming there are no questions are based on anything thus far?
I do not see any hands right at the moment.
Okay. Let's have the motion then.
Sure. So the motion is to adopt the updates to the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan as discussed by the AIB and contained in the Pillar 1 through 5 documents, the Outcome Measures Work Group report as modified and approved by the AIB, and the August 1st slide presentation. So all of the materials from today, plus the Outcome Measures Work Group with the changes that the AIB made to it.
I'm going to move the motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
The moved and properly second. Motion is now before us. In the discussion, issues associated with the motion, please raise your hands and we'll consider those at this point in time. Member Curran, I see.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were voting. I was raising my hand. Oh, jumped the gun.
Yeah. Are there any questions related to the motion before us? I don't see no one has raised them, so we'll now have the vote and we'll do this by hand. All in favor of the comprehensive motion that's read before us today, please indicate by raising your hand. And count that.
Chair, I'm on
everyone
camera because I'm in transit, but I'm saying aye.
Okay, we'll record that appropriately. Thank you.
Yep. That's everyone. That's 7.
Thank you. The motion passes. Are there any additional matters we need before we move for adjournment today?
Member Kerwin.
Chairman, if I just want to make a brief comment about how positively I feel about this process. We had a implementation plan and it was done in a very public way. And the plan was based on a lot of public input. And now we've made these modifications based upon extensive conversation and suggestions and information that has come from all sorts of different quarters, MSDE and others. So I just feel like this process has worked extremely well, and that we've been very open and accommodated the input that has come from a variety of different quarters. So I just wanted to make that observation.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments? Okay, let me again thank our tremendous staff, our executive director, and all the people who worked with us, the state board, our attorneys and everyone, and also the board members. We have put in an awful lot of work and we're still not through. Our next meeting is scheduled for what time and when, Madam Executive Director?
August 10th, Thursday, August 10th, beginning at 2:30.
I know that we've had an awful lot of meetings, and that does not include all of the committee meetings and everything else that we probably not have been engaged in for everyone, but there's an awful lot of work from all of you. And we've accomplished a great deal with all of our supported personnel and organizations that have worked with us. So let me again thank all of you. And if no further question, there's a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and probably second that we adjourn. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Did you stop the stream too?